Welcome to the Totally Awesome Fishing Show. This is just a short tackle tip that I put together in some really nice weather during the old lockdown when I got really bored. Great for beginners, shows you how to shot a wagler float that's get straight down the lake. And when I say the lake, I mean my pond. Oh boys, this is the life. And you know what I mean by that when I say this is the life? That's because I'm running this with twin cameras and I've actually got a double ladder. I've got the wife up there. Hey everybody. Hillary, you okay up there? No, just hang on for another half an hour. The fingers won't slip just yet. Camera in one hand, fingers on the other. You can cling up there. So Hillary's up on the roof of the garage, filming away up there. And guys, I'm going to tell you, this is how I shot a wagler float. Now, I'm no expert, but I do like float fishing. I know a lot of you guys out there actually like float fishing as well. There's just something about seeing the float vanish, as we call it, bury, or just start creeping and drifting along. And you tench fishermen out there, you know what it's like in the peak of summer. You've got the float just set up by the lily pads. You see the bubbles coming up around the float, little fizz of bubbles, and then you see a little lift, little bobbling around to the float, and then suddenly it just goes across and it goes under ever so slowly. Boom, hook up and hang on, because tench nearly always try and bury in those lilies. I've done a lot of tench fishing like that. It's traditional. It's not the big heavy feeders, throw it out in the middle of a gravel pit. No, I like float fishing for them, I must admit. Quite close is nice in the summer. Anyway, rod and reel, you ask yourself. Guys, stay there, Hillary. No, stay there, you're fine, you're fine. 25 minutes to go. I've got Smith & Mabel as backup down there. I'm using for rod just to show you this, because this is filmed in the lockdown before somebody gets their knickers in a twist. It's in the lockdown, in my own property. I've got a little pond there, and I think there's enough depth in there to show you how to shot the wagler and also plumb the depth. This is for beginners, really. Any advanced, super advanced people there, move along. I've got nothing of interest for you guys. Obviously, I'm not saying you know it all, but you know it all. This is for beginners. If you're a beginner, a novice, an older guy getting back into fishing, just wants the very, very basics, this might help you. I'm using, for the illustration of this, just a pen rod, a collapsible pen rod and reel, because if I use a reel that's too big and a rod that's 13 feet long, I'll be across the other side and catching daisies. Right, here's my float box. I used to have a lot more. I'm just going to get a couple of wagglers and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so I've rigged up a wagler float here. Again, basics. I've got 15-pound line in it, guys, don't worry, but I've had to splice a piece of 5-pound line on it because that's what most of you will be using, something like that. Now, first, I'm going to say there's several different types of wagler floats. You've got this one. Let's start with this one, in fact. This is just a straight wagler there. Just a straight, just happens to be clear plastic. You don't have to buy clear plastic. I'm not plugging any makes. A float's a float's a float. You can see the top of the float, the rest is plastic. Now, before I show you the floats, the best way to do it is show you the setup. Hopefully there you can see a locking shot either side of the float. Now, I've also got an adjusting shot, a couple of number 6. Now, almost forget I've said number 6, there's number 8s, number 10s, there's all different sizes of shot. That's the shot that it takes this float to just set like this right up to there. Okay, now I can put more shot on to make adjustments. If it's very, very windy, it's going to drag the float and it's going to pull that under, so you can undershot it and allow for the drag of wind. But basically, in still conditions, you'd want it for about there. Now, what I do use, I'm not a wild lover of them, but I do use them, is this little rubber sleeve thing there. It's got a ring in it, you can see just there. You slide your line through that, so that's locked either side of the shot, and I'm going to call it your adjusting shot. So there you can see that, hopefully, just there. That spins around, but being it's like valve rubber, although this has its own little eyelet there, and you can put your locking shot either side like that. Anyway, obviously you can do, but should you want to change that float, you've got to cut the hook off, the shot off, and everything to start again. This way, this little rubber sleeve allows you just to slide your float over like that. Look, see? So I can pull this off, I can pull this one off, and just for instance, I can put a different one on, I can put a bodied waggler on. Now you can end up losing shot, you can end up casting those, and occasionally if they get worn, they will fall off. But if you've got fresh ones, new ones, the elasticity of that silicone is very good and it sticks. So that's how it sits, and that's how it goes in the water. Okay, so you know when you get to the lake, we'll say, and this will be for lakes generally, you shot your float like this. The biggest thing you must do, if you're a beginner, there's fish that feed on the bottom of the lake bed, there's fish that are just above it, and there's fish near the surface. Let's say rudd at the surface, roach further down but just off the bottom, bream, tench, carp on the bottom. And if you're throwing bait in, it's tumbling down, it doesn't necessarily suspend. It can go through the water slowly, it can go quite quickly. It could be loose feed, sweet corn, boom, straight down. Either way, going to go to the bottom, isn't it? So my tip is, most of the fish you should catch will be with a bait that's set on the bottom. So onto the end of your hook, to get your plumb depth, to find the right depth that you're fishing in, you put a plumb weight. It's one of these. So this little chap here is a plumb weight. It's heavier than the float, so you've got to use a plumb weight that's heavy enough to pull the float right under. So you're shotting your float to make sure you've got it cocked, got it set where you want it. Then you go with the hook through this brass eyelet, out the other side, there's a little cork base there. You just push it into the cork base. Okay, so it's sitting like this on the lake bed, drops down like this onto the lake bed. What I tend to do is to find the depth, is start shallow first, a foot. And then what happens is this weight will go to the bottom, pulling the float under. So then you alter the shot, slide it up a bit more, 18 inches, 2 feet, might be 3 feet. You adjust it until the float starts to come up. It'll be flat on the surface, then it come like this, then it come like this, then it come like this, and eventually you'll get it set like this. I'll try and show you in my fish pond what I'm talking about. Now my pond here is very, very shallow, so I'm going to start to show you maybe 6 inches. So I'm just going to lower this into the water, and as I lower it down, the weight should sink the float, because it's going to be overweight, obviously. So as I lower it down, I'm going to pull the float, boom, right under. So you know that that's too deep. What you're going to do is keep adjusting that float up until you get it to sit right. So now I've adjusted it deeper. It should just go down, and hopefully, it's come right up, but it's still not visible to you out on the riverbank. You can see the weight is heavier than the float. Set it a little bit deeper again, hopefully this time it's right what we call dead depth. That's absolutely, as you see that just there, look, the weight is dashed on the bottom and the float's just set there. You see by my rod tip just here. Now if it's dead depth, it's just barely touching the bottom, that's good for bites. But if there's any wind drift, it's going to do this. It's going to drag the float. I'll try and do it with the rod like this, out of your swim. So then you want to fish slightly over depth by sliding one of those shot nearer to the hook. So you can see there, I've got my 2 locking shot and the 2 adjusters. I just move the lower one of those adjusting shot. Say, let's go down to about here. Okay, so that is going to call that the length of your finger, say 3 inches. Okay, but by putting that there, you are still going to have that drag across the lake bed like this. You want really that shot laying on the bed. So you've got 3 inches here. Make sure you also move 3 inches up there. That way you've got the right depth that you already plumbed from here to the shot. There's my, imagine the lead is the hook bait. It's going to lay like that. So there's a shot, it comes down like this, just rests on the lake bed, this float starts to just drift out of position, but that weight will just slow it up a little bit. And very often you'll get fish like that, even in very slightly ripply conditions, which is quite annoying when this waggler float does start dragging away or dragging out of position. Sometimes it doesn't matter, because when it's coming through a baited swim, if it's fairly clear water, the fish see that movement of the maggots or the sweet corn or the bread just bumping like this, and you will get bites. If you ask me what I do most of the time, if I'm fishing for roach, I'd probably be fishing what we call dead depth, so the hook is just touching the bottom. If I'm fishing for carp, tench and bream, and I don't want it really moving out of position, I put that extra shot, slide it down like that. So that's the principle of the waggler float, but I'll show you a couple of other variations of it. It's worth knowing. The same principle is always worth doing, plumbing the depth first. Get yourself 2 or 3 of these little plumb weights, so wherever you go, you can always set up the depth. And you might want it shallow, you might want to see how deep, you might think, I'm going to stop here over by those lilies, it's really nice. I think that's 18 feet deep. You put your float there, and it's not, it's 2 feet deep. You could be wasting your time, couldn't you? So that's the idea, always plumb your depth before you start, especially if you're on new water. So you can notice by fishing over by those lilies, in fact I'm not fishing, Gravy, not fishing, you're pretending to fish, because I've gone over depth, look, that float, just tease it off the lily there, is sitting about 1/4 of an inch high. And that's because I've moved that shot up to make sure it anchors. Then if you do get a ripple or drift, and this starts to happen, the float just starts to drift away, that shot will just hold it in position, and this float, as it drags, will just start to sink a little bit. Now by fishing like this, with the shot on the bottom, you can see it's come up a little bit there, but I'm just starting to get some wind drift here. Do you see the bits around it? So if that did drag, what you would get, let's put it back over there, and it starts drifting with the wind like this, eventually that shot will just slow it down, and that will pull this float down a little bit deeper. There's a tench about to take this, guys, watch. Strike. So other floats you can get which come under the, I think, waggler classification is a bodied waggler. Can you see this? Like we call them onions. They can have a long tapered body up here, and they take a lot more shot. So in windy conditions, that will take 3 or 4 times the amount of shot of the last one, but it still can be shotted down to there, which is a black piece of paint. Then it go down to the yellow, or you can go right down to just the orange. The difference being, if you shot it to the orange, if you get one of those lift bites I showed you, you'll see the yellow start to show. So you're sort of prepared, you're on edge for it. When you've got that and you see that, you know that's some form of bite. Then you've got a sort of wind beater one, which is the same principle, a longer bodied, but it's very, very thin here. So that's stable, and there's not much, if there is drift, or a drift beater, I think is another word they use them, a sort of blobby top to it there, so you can fish this at distance. And some of these waggler floats will cast a long way. You can fish them 20 yards away, and provided you can see the float 20 yards away, you'll still catch. So that one's a very, very hair-like stem to it, you can see. And that's very good when it's very windy and you want to cast a bit farther. For beginners though, I strongly recommend. Forget the makes, forget what it's plastic, whatever it's made of. In fact, I'll put my finger over the name so that you don't get it. It's called a self-loaded or self-righting float. I personally absolutely hate shotting floats. It wastes so much of my fishing time. I wish they were all like this. It's called self-loaded. There's the weight. So that automatically, you just thread this through, it shots to there, and you can still add your additional shot to go down if you want it closer like that. So if you're beginners, I suggest going with a self-loaded float. Get yourself a couple of 3 and watch these plastic ones. If they crack, they fill with water. They're not as good, I don't find, as these ones which I say stick or balsa stems and a balsa body. I like the old school ones. Plastic ones are fine, but boy do they crack easy. Put stuff on them, in a reel on them in a box, and you're fishing away, it's got a tiny hair crack in it, it fills with water and the float starts sinking. And you don't know that because you've been striking for the last 10 times and not hooking anything, thinking it was bites, and it's not. So different waggler floats there, guys. Thanks for watching this. I hope it's a few tips for beginners, and I hope the beginners go out there and catch a load of fish. We'll see you next time. Hit those subscribe buttons, both channels, TA Fishing, TA Outdoors. Oh man, I'm going to catch some Zeds in this. It's beautiful. Oh.